Thanks everyone for having me. This is Mental Health and School Success. My name is Marcie Timmerman. I'm the Executive Director of Mental Health America of Kentucky. MHA Kentucky looks at mental health with a very broad view of mental wellness. Everyone has a brain, so everyone has mental health, right? It's on a spectrum of how good or bad, poor you're doing in that moment. So it's not just illness that we talk about. We're kind of like the heart association of mental wellness. So we try to cover a broad spectrum of topics, which means I have lots of resources at my fingertips, which is wonderful. One of which is our back to school toolkit, which is primary driver of some of this information that I'm sharing today. My background, I have been in Lexington for 15 years now, working as a mental health advocate pretty much since I walked in the door of the state. I do have a master's in health administration degree from the College of Public Health. So very big fan of UK, so thank you all. This past year though, things have been tough, right? COVID sucks. And I don't think that anything that we experienced during COVID was stuff that we didn't experience before. It's just we all did it collectively. I think it's important to recognize that our school age youth had a lot of uncertainty. Are we going to school today in person? Are we doing it virtually? Is my virtual stuff changing? What's going on? What are the new rules, right? They had a lot of fear, right? Fear of the virus, fear for people that they love getting the virus and dying of it. Lots of fear of death going on around there of all kids of all ages, from what I'm hearing. Loss of normalcy, disruptions of routine. Kids don't do that well. Even adult kids, even college students, even adults don't deal well with that. So just something to think about when we talk about mental wellness right now is to recognize that these things exist. And I always want to take a moment and talk about grief because I think a lot of people misunderstand what grief looks like. Our kids are grieving sometimes that loss of normalcy. We as adults can grieve a loss of a job, a change in a system, right? A loss of a coworker who maybe just moved on to a different job, things like that. So we want to recognize that there's a grief process we all go through, not just when someone dies, although many of us have lost loved ones, but also for students and people and other things that in our lives that we might have lost, including pets, right? Some of those have been dying in my feed these days on Facebook. So, all right. And I'll do my best to address all the ages of kids because we do have a lot of folks present with different issues. Some of the bigger community traumas that we've all been facing lately, and that many have faced for many years, right? And we may not have put a label on. COVID-19 is being the one that everyone talks about, right? But then we also have racism, right? We had a lot of issues where racism was really in the forefront, and I don't think it's really receding backward as much. We've had some xenophobia, religious persecution, political division, right? Financial losses happen to us all. Increased work stress, all this stuff on our parents and on ourselves and our friends and our family and community. Our kids see that and they feel it. And I think that's important to recognize that, we like to sometimes think of kids as being kind of innocent and out of the way, but they've been here, right? They've been with you. Probably in the virtual environment, they've been literally right next to you for some of this. So it's important to recognize that. So what can we do? And I am a parent of a 7-year-old who is currently experiencing anxiety right now. So right there with all of you, as far as that goes in that age range. It's really rough, right? These second graders have not had a regular school year yet. They don't even know what a regular school year looks like. Some of the first things though that we talk about is taking care of your own mental health. You hear that oxygen mask first conversation on an airplane, right? That image of you have to put on your oxygen mask before you put it on your child's. There's a reason for that. They pick up on our anxiety and tension, right? And they know that this is going on. So being open about your own feelings, leading by example in how you deal with those feelings, by modeling healthy behaviors and coping skills is important. Now, I'm not saying you have to be a perfect person, right, with this stuff. I want to make sure that that's not the message you're hearing. I'm saying learn how to cope with your own behavior, learn better coping skills, learn better healthy behaviors for yourself as well. And we have lots of information on things like that. But if your kids are seeing you sit at home and being very snappy and irritable all the time, right, that's going to affect their mental health. So just keeping that in mind as we go forward, right? Not living in a shame and blame game though, but more in a proactive, hey, I'm going to do this for my kids. I'm going to go get some help if I'm having some problems. I think that's important stuff. So some feelings that you may have been experiencing: stressed out, you're guarded, panicked, can't concentrate, can't read. I hear people talk about not being able to read all the time when they're stressed out. Eating too much, drinking too much, right? Any of these things are feelings that we could have felt just because COVID existed and all the chaos that happened with it. These are also things that we feel when we get traumatized as a community. We find that there's a lot more of this coming out. And our kids can have these feelings, and we'll get to that in a minute. So just a couple of things for you. Make sure you're looking at opportunities to laugh. And it may feel weird to laugh sometimes, but watching a comedy show, watching that meme that just makes you giggle, or the GIF that makes you giggle, or having a funny, even if it's dark humor, conversation with someone who can engage with that properly with you. It's really important to do that, to retain that ability to laugh right now. Getting enough sleep is huge. Y'all probably have heard lots of things about sleep. Our kids need regular sleep, and I'll be talking about more of that, but so do us adults. Right? So everyone needs a regular sleep pattern. That's really helpful. If you need sleep tips, I've got tons of them handy. So exercise as appropriate. Now don't over-exercise. Don't exercise 12 hours a day, right? Exercise in a way that's appropriate for you. We average about 15 minutes a day is really helpful. And that can be done in 5-minute increments 3 times a day if you need to, right? So do some kind of exercise that works for you. Set healthy boundaries with yourself and also with your kids. Teach them to help set some healthy boundaries. So what do I mean by that? I mean, being able to tell people no, right? To be able to say, no, I don't need to join that Zoom right now at 9 o'clock at night, right? To be able to say, okay, I'm not really talking about COVID right now. I'm really COVIDed out and I want to just watch something else. I want to watch some junk TV. That is okay. Being able to tell people who are toxic to you, who are not making you feel good, who are not supporting you, that you're really just not in a space right now to talk to them. Can I call you back? Or can I text you back later? But be kind to yourself as well. That inner voice that we have as parents, I think we tend to run through this idea that I'm not a good enough parent, am I a bad parent? All those kinds of conversations we have with ourselves. We can be awful to each other and to ourselves. So try to watch that inner dialogue. When you're having those negative thoughts, counter them. Really think about stopping them and saying, hey, is that really true? Like, what am I basing good parenting off of? Like, those kinds of questions are really valid. So for myself, like my son was having some anxiety. I was like, well, what did I not teach him about anxiety, right? And I'm like, well, I can't teach him everything. He's 7. Right? So we're going to deal with what we see and work together with the school. So be kind to yourself, have that good conversation with yourself. And stay connected to loved ones. And those loved ones don't have to be family if family is not supportive of you. And I think that's important to say. It can be friends, family, whoever actually cares about you. Stay connected. And I think you want to make sure your kids stay connected. We saw that with teens a lot, that feeling of disconnection in the very beginning of COVID. Sometimes that's been lingering into when they're back to school because they really just have kind of lost that social gel they had before. So working on proactively helping them stay connected to people who they are close to, who are positive people, right, in their lives is really important. So some things as parents we can do is reevaluate our expectations and anticipate challenges. So our toolkit was created kind of on the way to school, and a lot of our kids are already in school, so I'm going to adapt a little bit as I go. But children and teens can act different now, right, when they're going to school. And I think that's still continuing for several of them on the way to school after fall break right now. After fall break, what are we going to do? We're going to go back into our routine that we had before fall break, but it wasn't really as routine as it would have been had we had a normal year last year, right? So just kind of keeping that in mind, that they may not know what to expect and they may need a reminder of what's going on at school and how they're supposed to act and what their schedules will be. And keeping that patience and compassion at the forefront of our minds. I'm trying to be patient right now. I'm trying to be compassionate right now. If you have to tell that to yourself, that is okay. Having that as one of your inner voices is helpful because it's really easy to react in the moment and not have that moment where you're like, I need to be patient and compassionate because this child needs that right now. So work as a team with the school. So all of us, I think, have school-age children. It looked like most of us had school kids in school of some kind. So whether that's college, high school, middle school, elementary school, even preschool, right? The more of a team building environment and attitude you bring to taking care of a child, the better. We find that that is a better mental health outcome. It is a better health outcome for everybody in a community. If our kids have that 360 kind of support system. So be your child's best advocate, speak up for what their needs are. Do not feel like a bad tattling parent. If a teacher or someone at school is doing something that you have a question about, be able to talk to them about it. And if you can't, then we need to talk about the school system in a bigger level, right? About how to address needs of parents, because that 360 communication is key for everyone's support. We know it is a suicide preventive factor. So for instance, so making sure that there's as much of a conversation as can be. Now, those of you with college students, that 360 piece kind of goes away a little bit because college is college, right? They're adults. But making sure you're connecting with those kids, finding out, who are they connecting to as a professor, as a TA, are they asking questions about that can put you in the loop. If there are problems that come up later, you can at least have a way of talking to your college student about it. Encouraging communication and emotional vulnerability. We used to tell kids that they were kids and not talk to them like they were thinking human beings. And we really have to change that, right? We have to really ask kids what's going on and ask open-ended questions as one of the keys to that. So folks, it's easy to say, how was your day? And get a, right? But asking like, oh, what nice things happened today? Or who did you sit with at lunch? Or what kind of games did you play today? Or, what was your favorite subject? And if you know their favorite subject, like what was Miss Sword up to or something like that. Ask a very specific but still open-ended question can help a lot. So, and then when they're saying that they have anxiety or feelings of concerns, right? If they're saying, gosh, it's been a rough day, mom, ask more questions, right? Ask, it's okay to be vulnerable and talk to me about the fact that you feel scared. A lot of our teenage boys right now are really struggling with communication and emotional vulnerability because toxic masculinity tells them to be tough and stick it out. But they need to have someone in their life that they can talk to in reality and talk about their emotions. So the best you can do to crack that open, the better. I've got more information on them specifically. If you have a teenage boy, I'll be happy to send more information. And know when it's a sign of something bigger. When whatever's going on is a bigger issue. If they're having memory and concentration problems at school, again, in COVID, that might be just COVID, right? COVID stress. But if it's persisting for several weeks, that's a big red flag for us. If they're feeling like they're not wanting to eat anymore, they're excessively worrying, if they're not really sleeping or they're sleeping too much, so either too little or too much, both are big warning signs. These are things that we really care about checking into at a more professional level, especially when they persist for a couple of weeks straight without really any improvement. So be aware of those kind of warning signs, and we'll talk about more of those. So youth did have a lot of concerns about going back to school. With COVID-19, there were concerns about masking, right? We had a special legislative session all about fighting over whether or not we're going to wear masks in schools. And ultimately, our schools predominantly said yes. But those kinds of chaotic things and uncertainties really hang over kids' heads. So we need to remember that and take that into account. On bullying, one of the virtual benefits was bullies weren't there in person. You couldn't get just randomly knocked in the face, right, by somebody's fist. You couldn't get shoved in a locker. You couldn't be picked on as easily in class in the virtual learning. So dealing with bullying is a whole nother topic that I did not prepare for, but I'm happy to do more on or send you more information on. When our kids were going back to school, though, that was really a concern. Those who were always bullied felt like they were going to go back to that negative situation, and really intervening as a parent, trying to make sure that 360 communication is in place, right, and that your child has as many skills and tools as they can handle for dealing with bullying. It was important, and I think it continues to be. Kids were worried about getting in trouble, especially our younger kids. Finding a new groove, right, finding that groove back took a while. How do I sit down in class for this long? Right, a lot of virtual learning, they were able to get up, they were able to snack in the middle of the day, they were able to move a lot and nobody cared. So just getting used to being back at their desk for that long. And teenagers were showing that as well. And then with school violence, there was no fighting in the halls, there was no brandishing a gun, right, in virtual school. So there were some benefits to it for the short term, but those things are, those threats are back now, and recognizing that they're there is really important, I think, as parents. Sorry, I've got to check. Give me 1 second. Yeah, I will definitely get more information on Teen Boys, y'all. So when we talk about preparing kids for school, we talk about establishing more of a psychological and emotional safety. And that really starts at home, but it also goes into the school environment and the classroom environment. Why it matters? You cannot think about anything else if you're worried and afraid. If you're sitting in class worried about violence happening to you in the hallway, all you're thinking about is the violence that might happen in the hallway, not the math class in front of you. And when you feel safe, you're able to explore new things and do really creative ideas and get into projects a lot better, right? And get more in-depth learning out of what you're doing. So most of a teen's time is spent at school. Most of a kid's time is spent at school, and they deserve to feel safe in that space. And I think that's an attitude that we as parents have to make sure we're bringing to that school board and to the schoolroom and the classroom. We expect it to be a safe place for our kids. And I think in some places that has not been the community attitude. So it's important to bring that back as best we can on a bigger scale. So maybe not just one of us, but many of us. So some ways to make kids feel safe. Be prepared. The more we can tell them about what to expect. So some of you mentioned yours are on fall break. My child just went back from fall break this week. Louisville was on fall break for a whole week the week before. So, as we go back, we were talking about what to expect again. What are we going to do at class? What are our things that we need to have ready for class tomorrow? Doing that reminders process, especially for younger children, is important. But also, I find running it through with teens seems to have a really good positive environment. Like, what do I need in my backpack? What did I need for class? What were my homework assignments? Where am I going again in the morning? Those kinds of reminders can be really helpful. And really, the more that you run that through with kids, the more they seem to understand and get safety out of that feeling. So it's really important. Also, knowing the schools, who the friends are in the class. Being able to name a few friends that are going to be there is really important. Who are the people you know in class already? Everybody does that when class assignments go out for elementary school. They're always like, who's in whose class, right? Everywhere. That's actually a supportive psychological response. We want to know that we know people in the classroom. And it's really hard to do that as a parent right now, to know other parents in the classroom. So any chance you get to connect, so PTA meetings and if you have class Zooms, that kind of thing that parents can participate in, that's really helpful. Being able to identify an adult that child trusts is really important for children to feel safe as well. So having an adult that they can trust. That person does not have to be a teacher. That person can be a janitor, a coach, a school bus driver, someone that they trust. If your child cannot say that they trust anyone, I would ask more questions. Who would you go to if you were in trouble? Who would you go to if you were having a breakdown, of anxiety? What would be happening if you can't think? Who is the person that comforts you? Might be another good question. But we know that with LGBTQ youth especially, having an adult who is affirming and who is non-judgmental and able to listen without judgment to whatever's going on is so important for suicide prevention, but also just general mental wellness. So just keep that in mind, that having them make that connection is a good thing and a normal thing. I think sometimes parents are like, oh, he really loves the janitor. Why? Well, it's fine. If that janitor is putting out emotional energy that works for your kid, just make them part of the system, right? And envelop them into the process because there's somebody your kid trusts. That's important. Tell someone about your worries. So talking to someone, right? We talked about that a little bit previously, that making sure that we're talking to our kids, keeping those lines of communication open. I know teachers are like, oh my gosh, I've never communicated so much in my whole life right now. And I know that some of them are exhausted by it, but they also know the value of it. So even if they're having an off day and they're exhausted, they still know that having that 360 conversation is really important. And for teens, especially, being able to talk about it to somebody, even if it's another teen, is important. So those phone calls, those text chats, those video game chats, those are important for their mental health to an extent, right? I'm not saying let them play 12 hours of video games. That would be detrimental, but having some space and time to do that is important. And if you don't think your child has connections with someone that they can really talk to, that might be we need to have some conversations about how to help them make friends. And we can do that too. So. One of the things that we give as a tool for children who are having some problems is to have a grounding item. So having some kind of item they associate with being helpful to them. In this case, it has a little bumpy cube that helps with sensory information and things like that. That would help. It's kind of a clickery thing too, but it doesn't have a loud click. Very important to know that you want to get one without a loud click. It's an item or object. So my son takes a stress T-Rex that I had gotten from a friend. It was like a stress ball that's shaped like a T-Rex. And he knows that he can press on that. He can kind of move it into little animated things, but it's very small, right? It's not disruptive to the rest of the class. He knows he's not allowed to throw it or he loses it. But having some kind of item like that, so maybe there'll be a poppet. I have one of those here for when I'm having a boring meeting. I have poppets. These things are very popular right now, but they're not super loud, a lot of them. So finding an item like that that can help them is really important. Our kids do get anxious, and that's normal, right? That's normal for a kid to get anxious. Is not a big deal. But if they need the object to help and it helps them focus during the day, that's really helpful. So just having that open conversation with teachers too about what the items are that they'll accept, and making sure it's not a toy, right? Like that it is a thing that is really there for their nerves. So yeah, photos sometimes can help as well. So just maybe a photo of family at home on the desk, that can help a lot. I know a lot of preschools have gone to where they have everybody bring in a family photo. The reason for that is to help those kids feel safe and connected to each space they're in case you didn't know. Do we have any questions so far? I don't want to keep going if people are wanting more information. So some of the things that trauma might look like in a classroom. So we talk a little bit about trauma in our back to school toolkit this year because we feel like there are levels of trauma. There's little t trauma, and that's that community trauma we were talking about, that kind of present trauma always. And then there's big T traumas like child abuse, right? That's real trauma. And they're all real traumas, but very different levels, right, of how they are reacting to them. So here's a couple of ways that they may show up. If someone is having some big T trauma in their life, these are things that may happen. Low self-confidence, concentration again, you'll see that's kind of consistent. But regular tardiness, absence from class, not able to come on time. Exhaustion. That kid who is sleeping in class all day, probably not good sleep at night, probably either sleeping too much or too little, right? And the exhaustion from showing up because they're just mentally exhausted and school might be their safe place, so they get to sleep. Understanding extreme self-reliance or hyper-independence are reactions to trauma. I think a lot of times we don't recognize that as a trauma reaction. Feeling defiant behavior, right? This is not a comprehensive list. I do want to claim that out. Behavior shows up in different ways. But I find it interesting too, the hoarding one, snacks, school supplies, etc. So if you know someone who has every kind of school supply and triplicate, right, and they're all on their desk and they have to have them, that's probably a trauma sign. So time to ask them more questions. Do we have any classroom teachers on the call? I should have asked that. Any folks who teach in a classroom of any age? Not seeing an answer yet. Can do a reaction or put in the chat, yes. Okay. So I will pull out just a little bit of this and just kind of go over it briefly and quickly. Teachers, there are things we can do if you are teaching a class or in a group environment to help make it feel more safe and open for our kids. Be open about your own feelings. If you're having a bad day, engaging them and coming back to taking care of you on a bad day is really important. So engaging them and learning how to support one another is an emotional skill that we all need to build. So doing that in the classroom is helpful. So it's okay if you're having a bad day yourself as the teacher, right? Have the kids help you out, find creative ways to do that, and brainstorm those before you're having a bad day so that they're truly helpful to you and to the kids. A lot of times kids need to feel heard, right, and seen. Don't dismiss concerns. So when I talked about listening non-judgmentally, that is a skill we teach in mental health first aid. And I really like that skill because talking about it as a skill lets us know we aren't born with it. Listening to people without reacting, listening without trying to come up with a solution automatically, listening without trying to think about what I'm going to say next. All of those things are important. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that thinking about a solution right ahead. We're just taking in the information. Now, as a parent myself, sometimes that can be really freaking hard, and that is okay. But the more you practice it, the easier it becomes, and the more your kid will open up to you. I have seen that firsthand. I have seen it happen in therapy offices. I've seen it happen in, groups out in the world, and my friends that have kids, when I've been like, you've got to stop doing that, right? When you intervene as a friend, right? I'm not a provider. So I was like, but you got to stop answering them before they're done talking to you, right? So you have to do that. And knowing that, engaging in that is important. And as a teacher, it's the same kind of thing. Teachers who focus on positive reinforcement have better responses from kids who have trauma and kids who are going through a hard time right now in general. So the more we can focus on doing great things rather than doing bad things, the better. So I think our students here in Fayette County, and I know some of the other surrounding counties have had, those teachers have had extensive training in this. I'm happy to send some of that information if someone needs it too, because it's really a shift. Right. It's a shift from the way a lot of us grew up. It's a shift from the way teaching was taught for a long time. But we now know that it's much more successful as a technique for all kids, not just ones who have mental health issues. So, but also creating opportunities for students to show off their skills is really important. I know that I've heard people make fun of people who do like skits in class and art, and they offer all kinds of like show and tell options and stuff like that, even in the older grades right now. They're doing that because it helps kids show off what they're good at. So maybe they suck at math, but math had a find a math object thing, right? And the math object might be their favorite piece of music. So bring someone together in a kind of that was a weird example, but it would work. So it's one that I knew of that worked out really well for that teacher and for the students. And it really helps people connect and feel welcome, even when they're struggling in the subject. All right. So yeah, you only know so much about home life. Engaging with parents is important, having that 360 conversation. And also setting good boundaries as a teacher. Make sure that you're not answering emails at 11 o'clock at night if that is not what fits for your life. If you have hours where you are unavailable, let parents know that. Let parents know you're only going to answer certain times of day. That is okay to set a good boundary. All right, and then sorry, I was checking the chat there. And increasing your trauma competency as a teacher, right? Understanding what your students might be going through. Are they dealing with racism? Are they from a poverty area? My son goes to a Title I school. The average student in his class does not speak English. The average student in his class does not know where their food is coming from next week. So we have to make sure that we understand our kids, right? And who is in our classroom. So if we're dealing with college students, doing a little get to know you at the beginning of class can get repetitive for them. They get a little bit blah, whatever, but informs you as a teacher kind of where they're coming from and helps you know where to start. So if you're teaching collegiate classes, because you're at UK, I assume some of you probably do that. It's important to have that get to know you moment, and it can feel repetitive because they're doing it with every teacher, but there's a reason for it, right? There's a reason not to throw that option away. It helps you kind of know where they're coming from. And I think that's important. I actually told some teenagers that who were expressing concerns and like rolling their eyes at a teacher doing that as well. It's important. And I was like, hey, that means they care about you. They want to know more about you. You know, just a very quick kind of reminder to them. It's okay to roll your eyes, but there's a reason we're doing it. So one of the other things I want to mention, when we have kids who have trauma, and honestly right now, all of us are, right? All of us are coping with something. Support, reassurance, and comfort is really important. So find those ways to support them, whatever that might be. And you may have to ask them, how can I support you right now? If you have to ask the therapy questions, sometimes it works. And be like, I don't know how to support you right now, but we're gonna go get help, right? If you don't have a clue, it is okay to go get outside help. So maybe that's the school counselor, maybe that's a teacher, maybe that's a friend of yours who's been through the same thing, right? Wherever that help might come from. It's important. You can also give me a call. That's what I'm here for sometimes. It's just helping people know where to start, right? Giving kids reassurance, though, I think we underestimate how much that is important because I think it's easy to get lost in the everyday for every kid of any age. They get scheduled out, they do other things, they go out with their friends and stuff, and they're not really with you, and you haven't really given them any, hey, it's okay to be sad today, or how are you doing? It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to not want to go out right now, right? Being able to reassure them that it is going to be okay though at the end of this, and that whatever they're doing is important. So maybe coming back to them with some words of reassurance, like, okay, you're not alone. You're not the only one feeling anxious right now. That's been really helpful for my 7-year-old. And I know it's been helpful to other teens. Parents I know have said it really worked, that I'm not alone. I'm not the only one doing this. I'm not the only one having this problem. I think that was really helpful to not feel alienated. And reassurance is not that condescending, like, well, you're going through it just like everybody else. Like, you can do that in a different way, right? The way I say it makes a difference of, there are other kids who are having this problem. You're not alone. And the good news is we have a path forward. We can figure something out, right? We may need to go get help to do that, but we can do it. So see, the difference there was kind of like a minimizing, almost dismissing, but also like a caring one. And that's what we need to provide more of. And the more comfort we can give our kids. Kids under the age of 12 need 8 hugs a day. Was a factor I saw at the beginning of COVID, and I started laughing. My son now makes sure he has 8 hugs a day. So something to think about in your home if you have younger kids especially, but even our older kids need hugs, right? They need comfort, whatever that might be. Sometimes comfort is the form of a weighted blanket or a very fuzzy blanket available to them. Sometimes comfort is having a house that doesn't, is clean enough that you can function in it. I'm not giving you any shame if yours isn't right now, because I'm living that life. But but knowing that it's a functional environment for them, that they feel comfortable in their environment is really important. So whether it's you giving them a hug, a pat on the back, a shake, a handshake, whatever works for you from comfort as your family dynamics both. But I think that's important to remember the comfort part. And honestly, who doesn't need a hug every now and then? And then also we talk about needing to make sure that kids feel like they have choices, control, and empowerment. The more we give them a few choices that have been narrowly picked out in a lot of cases, but it's still a choice. Like, oh, you're going to school today, but are you going with mommy or daddy or by bus, right? Something like that is something we do in our house. It might be you have to get dressed today. Are you going to wear this shirt or this shirt? Very simple choices can make them feel in control. And that's huge. If we feel in control of our lives, no matter how minutely, then we start feeling more comfortable. Our brain gets that message that we are okay and we are safe. So the more options that they have to make some choices of their own, and the more control we can give them over their daily schedule, perhaps. And it's not every day, right? And it may not be everything, and it may not work for you exactly the way it works for someone else, but giving them some control over their lives can make them feel good. So just having something they can control, as simple as what's in their lunchbox, right? That kind of thing. So let's see here. And then empowerment, helping them help themselves. So in the case of my son, I'll use him as an example again. He's given me permission to do that, y'all, because I do ask. He learned to ask, can I go see the therapist today? He has a therapist in his school. He's very lucky for that. But he can go see her when he needs to. And he can speak up for that when he's having a really bad day. Now we're going to have to make sure he's not doing it to get out of his least favorite special. But that's another conversation. But teaching your kid that they have the power to change their circumstances can be really important. And honestly, some of us adults forget we have the power to change some circumstances. So if there are things we need to change, empowering them to make those decisions and giving them the control to do that is really important. And just one aspect of everything, a lot of folks who come to us come through our screenings. I think that's an important place to start. If you're worried about your student, your child, there is a parent screening on our screenings website. It is free, it is anonymous. It is very helpful to know if what you're going through and seeing out of your kid is something that might be needing a therapist or a psychiatrist or a doctor's appointment, whatever. We're not going to tell you exactly who to see. We're going to give you ideas of where to start. There are also DIY tools on there. So anyone over 18, there are also depression screenings, anxiety screenings, psychosis screenings. If you're not sure about your own drug use, if that is too much or just about okay, You can take that test and find out where are you on the spectrum? Are you easy, moderate? Are you really severe? Are we worried about you? And you'll get some DIY tools to help you handle it at home. So things to think about, and also, connections to providers if you want those things. That's kind of what I had prepared. Let me check the chat again here. Yeah, loving the 8 hugs a day. So important. Some folks were asking about ADHD and anxiety. ADHD is its own thing, right? Having an IEP is really important when you know your child has issues, because I think that's really the key to everything is that individualized plan, and that 360 communication can't hammer on that enough. When your kid has special needs, being clear about what those needs are, how they function, and what, if something's not working, empowering that child to say, hey, this isn't working anymore. Let's go back to the IEP plan, right? Those kinds of conversations are not easy. Some schools make them harder than others, right? But that is something that you as a parent being an advocate can change. I think that fidget item, that holding item could be really helpful for ADHD kids, as long as it doesn't become a distraction. So there's always that, is it going to work for every kid? No, but it'll work with some. And I think it's important to note that there are schools where kids are integrated all in one classroom, but have individualized learning. That model seems to work really well for kids who have highly special needs, like ADHD can be, or anyone with a developmental disability, those kinds of things. The more individualized learning plans that we can get them into, and the more that teachers understand that, the better.